You're listening to Campus Killings, brought to you by AbJack Entertainment. Be sure to check out some of the other great true crime podcasts from this network, including The Murder in My Family, DNA ID, Zodiac Speaking, Scene of the Crime, Missing Persons, Beyond Bizarre True Crime, and Citizen Detective. All of these podcasts are available for you to binge on right now, wherever you listen to podcasts. Subscribe where you're listening to this podcast so you don't miss an episode.
This case brings us to Orange County, California, where several co-conspirators turn on each other. On Easter Sunday, April 16, 1995, around 8:30 a.m., a driver saw a body of a man lying in a roadside field in Irvine, California. This was just 200 feet from the junction of Sand Canyon Road and the San Diego Freeway. The driver didn't stop, but he did call the police and reported the man, whom he said was either sleeping or dead. Irvine police found that the man was indeed dead. He was blindfolded, wrapped extensively in blue paper toweling, and his head, chest, back, and arms were mutilated with hack marks from what the medical examiner concluded was a meat cleaver or a machete. 2 fingers were nearly severed. He had also been beaten. A seasoned investigator described it as one of the most gruesome crime scenes that he had ever seen. After they received a call from the man's family, who had heard about a body being found, Irvine police were able to identify the homicide victim as 24-year-old Gonzalo Dominguez Ramirez. Ramirez was linked to a police report filed in Santa Ana a couple of days earlier. This report was called in by a Noel Reyes. He reported that he and Ramirez had been partying at a dance club called El Cortez on April 16th. The two had left the club at about 12:30 a.m. and had gotten into Ramirez's pickup truck. They had gotten only less than a mile when the pickup truck was rear-ended at a red light by a white Astro van. Ramirez had gotten out of the truck to confront the driver of the van. Reyes had stayed in the truck, but he turned around to look through the back window. He says he saw 2 men and a woman sitting in the van. One of the men got out of the van and sucker punched Ramirez. Reyes was about to get out to help his friend, but at this time a second man got out of the van and also began attacking Ramirez. Reyes says he ran down the block for help, locating a security officer at a Motel 6. But they were too late. When they returned to the truck, there were no signs of Ramirez, and there was also no signs of the van or its occupants. Because the incident leading to Ramirez's death seemed to have started in Santa Ana police took over the case from Irvine, and they began to dig into Ramirez's life to try to figure out who may have had a reason to want to harm him. Among papers in his room, they found a phone bill with a woman's name written on the back, Patty. There were also 2 phone numbers, one labeled school and the other labeled home. Investigator Ben Meza learned from Ramirez's roommate that he had a wife and children in Mexico, and he also had 3 girlfriends. But he thought that a woman named Patty, whose name was on that phone bill, might be a girl that Ramirez had told him that he had once visited in her dorm room. He was pretty sure that her name was Patty. The roommate said that Ramirez told him that he yanked off her pants and had sex with her. The phone number led investigators to college student Norma Patricia Esparza. She was 20 years old, attending Pomona College. The investigator, Meza, had sat down with her on June 8, 1995, and she said yes, she did know Ramirez. She said that he had yanked her pants off. She told the investigators that Ramirez had raped her and that she had told her recent ex-boyfriend, Gianni Anthony Van, about the rape. Transcripts of the interview obtained by Slate indicate that the police asked Esparza if Van had gotten upset when she told him that Ramirez has assaulted her. Yes, she said, but he was just there for me. And then when asked if Van had done anything to suggest he might retaliate, Esparza said no. But then she asked the detective, is he dead? She said later that she asked this because she noticed Meza was from the homicide unit. However, the recorded interview shows that the detectives did not tell her that. In fact, he said, quote, "I'm Detective Meza. This is Corporal Buckles. We work at the Santa Ana Police Department." Meza was suspicious. He urged Esparza to talk, saying that if she knew who killed Ramirez, that she needed to tell him. He warned her not to protect anyone and told her that he hoped that she was being completely honest with him.
She's not under arrest at this time or anything like that, right? This is just an interview.
I think at this point they're wondering if her ex-boyfriend perhaps hurt Ramirez in retaliation.
Okay. Oh, they're not insinuating her involvement. I got it. Okay.
5 days after this interview, Esparza abruptly married Gianni Van in a Vegas shotgun wedding. Now, because they were married, she could not be forced to testify against him. This is per the rules of spousal privilege. It would now it would be her choice whether she wanted to testify or not.
Doesn't look, the optics of this are not good, though.
No, I agree. And as such, Megan, the investigation kind of petered out. And this was until Patricia Esparza was arrested in 2012. Recall, this event was in 1995. Now we're fast forwarding to 2012. Professor Norma Patricia Esparza was 39 years old when she was arrested for a crime that had occurred 18 years earlier. So how did she end up here? Esparza was born in 1974 in an impoverished Mexican village with no running water. She moved to Santa Ana, California with her mother and 2 siblings when she was just 5 years old. Her father had already come to the U.S. to work in a factory. Miss Esparza, the mother, worked 3 jobs trying to make ends meet for Patty and her sister Juana, brother Rodrigo, and 2 other new baby siblings. Left on her own quite a bit, Patty lost herself in books, reading everything she should get her hands on, her favorite being A Tree Grows in Brooklyn. Through a program called A Better Chance, which was designed to increase enrollment of students of color at private schools, Patty got into Phillips Exeter Academy on scholarship. This was one of the nation's top prep schools, and from there she gained admission to Pomona College. By 2012, Norma Patricia Esparza, also known as Patty, had accomplished a lot. She graduated from Pomona with a double major in psychology and women's studies. She then got her doctorate in clinical psychology from DePaul. She was now a respected assistant professor of psychology at Webster University in Geneva. She was married, no longer to Van, but to her new husband, Jorge R. Mancias, and they also had a child. Her husband was a highly respected neurobiologist who worked on global health issues in Geneva, and he also had a biomedical lab at UCLA. In October of 2012, Esparza was scheduled to attend a conference in St. Louis. She boarded a flight which took her from Switzerland to Logan Airport in Boston. And this is where she disembarked and went through customs before she would head to her connecting flight to St. Louis. She did not make her connector. Instead, the professor was flagged by the customs agent, searched, handcuffed by airport police, and informed that she was under arrest for murder. The victim, Gonzalo Ramirez.
I can't wait to hear what evidence they have because the amount of time that lapsed, so that was 17 years. Okay, I'll wait. I'll impatiently await.
Yeah, so if you recall, the Ramirez case had stalled back in 1995, and this was due to a lack of evidence. But in 2010, some Santa Ana cold case detectives reopened the case, and they started to re-examine the case file and the evidence. Dean Folker and Frank Vajaro started to put together a case against the people that they felt were responsible for the death of Gonzalo Ramirez. Now, there were a few of them, Megan. These were Diane and Cody Tran, Gianni Anthony Van, Shannon Grease, and Norma Patricia Esparza.
Sorry, is that 4 people? How many people is that?
2, 3, 5.
5.
That's 5 people they have. Yep, they have 5 people here. So how did we get here? So 1995 and 1996 interviews had revealed that Van had vowed to get even with Gonzalo Ramirez for raping his ex-girlfriend Esparza. The detectives believed that the co-conspirators had helped him, and as a result, Ramirez ended up dead. But Van had denied it all in his 1995 and his 1996 interviews. The investigators in 2010 were able to connect the DNA that they found in a drop of blood in an auto body shop that was owned by Cody and Diane Tran. And this drop of blood, in fact, was Ramirez's blood. And the blue toweling that Ramirez's body was wrapped in was also traced to that body shop. So, of course, they started to investigate Cody Tran, who was the owner of the body shop. However, Cody died by suicide on July 12th when police came to arrest him for violating a protection order against his estranged wife, Diane. He had locked himself in a bathroom at her house and shot himself with her and their 2 sons at home. It had been reported that he was aware that the police had reopened the Ramirez case. And then the detective spoke with a college friend of Esparza's who told them some key information. It was enough for them to want to speak with Esparza again after 18 years. A detective emailed Esparza in September of 2010. The email said, quote, "I merely wish to speak with you regarding the incident which occurred in 1995. I hope you believe me when I tell you that you are, all caps, not a person of interest, all caps, nor are you a suspect in this case. You hold vital pieces of this puzzle, and I hope you choose to help me." She responded through her attorney that she had already told them everything she knew back in 1995 and 1996. But that wasn't really true, as we shall see.
Oh. And now, a brief word from our sponsors.
So because Esparza refused to cooperate with the 2010 investigation, a warrant was issued for her arrest. The detective who issued the warrant for her arrest wrote, quote, "Several attempts have been made to interview Norma Esparza to clarify information developed in the ongoing investigation, both in person and via telephone. Esparza has refused to make herself available to be interviewed." An Orange County arrest warrant was issued when investigators learned that Esparza was coming back to the U.S. for that St. Louis conference. They had put her name on the Homeland Security watch list, and they waited. When she flew back to the States, they flagged her at the airport, extradited her to California, and charged her with first-degree murder. The Orange County District Attorney's Office also filed murder and conspiracy charges against Gianni Anthony Van, now 43, Shannon Grease, now 41, and Diane Tran, now 44. Now, initially, Esparza refused to talk to California investigators, so they just let her sit in the Orange County jail and mull over the murder charge. Finally, on December 6, 2012, after 2 months in jail, Esparza gave the police a lengthy statement about what she knew related to the murder.
What did she know? Okay, very curious now.
So, you won't be surprised to know that Esparza agreed to testify against the others accused of the conspiracy and was permitted to pay $300,000 bail and return to France where she was living at the time. Now, this was all on the condition that she returned to the U.S. in 2013 to testify before a grand jury considering indictments in this case. Van, Tran, and Grease all pled not guilty. Esparza testified at the grand jury, and this is what she had to say. She said that her and her friend from Pomona, Nancy, were home in Santa Ana on a weekend in March 1995 visiting Esparza's parents and friends. Now, this was during her sophomore year. On Saturday night, March 25th, she went with her sister, Juana, and Nancy to the El Cortez nightclub, and that's where she met Gonzalo Ramirez. She says they instantly connected and spent the night dancing. She gave him her number. This is the Patty number written on the phone bill. Mm-hmm. The next morning, she and Juana and Nancy met up with Ramirez for breakfast. While they were at breakfast, he offered to drive Esparza and Nancy back to Pomona. Esparza agreed, and Ramirez drove them to campus in Claremont, which was about 25 miles away. Ramirez went with Esparza to her dorm room and laid down on the single bed. He told her he wanted to have sex with her. She says that she said no, and then he said, "You led me on." She says she then asked him to leave. Next, according to her, he coaxed her onto the bed, saying that they would just talk, but after a while, he began kissing her. She got up and told him to leave, but he pushed her to the floor and pulled her clothes off. She says she fought him for a bit, but then gave up. She zoned out during the assault. He asked if he could see her again, and of course she said no. After he left, she says she cried. Esparza says she was deeply ashamed, and although she went to a nurse at the college health clinic to obtain the morning after pill, she did not report the rape. According to court records, she testified, quote, "I don't think I was thinking at that time. I felt ashamed. I felt guilty. I did not want to come forward because I did not want my family to know." How many young women have felt this way? You know, as we all know, thousands of rapes go unreported each year. Mm-hmm. But that wasn't the end of the story. Esparza did confide in someone, her recent ex-boyfriend, Gianni Anthony Van. Van was enraged and he was determined to track down Ramirez. Esparza had no idea how to get in touch with Ramirez or where he lived. After some discussion, Esparza and Van and two other friends of his, Cody Tran and Shannon Grease, and Grease's girlfriend, Julie, went to the El Cortez nightclub. And again, this is where she has originally met Ramirez, so they were hoping to find him there. Esparza had told the 1995 investigators that they had gone to El Cortez twice looking for Ramirez, but in her testimony before the grand jury, she said she only went to the La Cortez nightclub once, and that was the night that she picked Ramirez out. Esparza claimed that she did not want to confront Ramirez. In her testimony, though, she said that Van was bent on revenge. She says he was, quote, insisting, yelling, telling me that I had to point out the rapist, point out the attacker, and at some point, Gonzalo Ramirez walked by and I cringed, and I told Gianni that that was the person. I thought the worst that would happen is he would rough him up. And again, this is what she reports to the grand jury. Mm-hmm. Esparza had pretty much told none of this to the 1995 investigators. She left out the whole part about identifying Ramirez for Van. Now, before the grand jury, she said that Van was very aggressive and bullied her. Because she had endured sexual abuse at the hands of her father for a duration of her childhood, she says she could not stand up to Van and felt threatened and intimidated by him. Van was very angry with her, she said, blaming her for wanting the sex to happen. She told the Slate reporter, Emily Bazelon, quote, it's been 18 years, and honestly, this part is blurry. But as far as I know, all that I thought was, this man is on me and I need to get him off. As for the part where she was married to Van for nearly a decade, she says, Gianni told me that we had to get married in order for me not to testify against him.
That doesn't explain, why the relationship lasted so long. I guess maybe there was a fear that if they, divorced, that he'd be subjected to court proceedings.
Yeah, I mean, she claimed that she was forced to marry Van and that she complied out of fear. Esparza had also told her friend at Pomona, Nancy, the whole thing. The 2010 investigators had talked to Nancy for the first time after noticing her name in the case file. When they interviewed her, they learned that Esparza had pointed Ramirez out to Van, and as a result, Ramirez was murdered. Esparza had never told them anything about this. This caused the investigators to focus on Esparza as a co-conspirator in a way that they hadn't before. And this is, again, what led to the warrant for her arrest. Mm-hmm. Now people think that Patricia was involved. The prosecutor, Mike Murray, told Andrea Canning of Dateline, quote, it certainly made me realize that Patricia was involved. Even after knowing that Gonzalo Ramirez had been brutally murdered, she was willing to sit down at the age of 19 or 20 with hardened homicide investigators from the Santa Ana Police Department, look them in the eye, and lie to them repeatedly. And there was more. Julianne Rojas also testified before the grand jury. She was the girlfriend of one of the other men, Shannon Grease, in the group. She was with Esparza and the others at El Cortez when Esparza pointed out Ramirez. She later said in an interview, quote, we all went out drinking that night so she could point out somebody that raped her. So Julie told the grand jury that the plan was for Grease, Van, and Cody Tran to run into Ramirez's truck as he left the club parking lot. This would then force him to stop, and then they would be able to pull him out of the vehicle and beat him up. And indeed, prosecutors told the grand jury that is, in fact, what had happened. Van, Shannon Grease, and Cody Tran rear-ended Ramirez's truck as he was leaving the club. They pulled him out and took him to the Accurate Transmission in Costa Mesa. This was the body shop owned by Cody Tran. As we know, Noel Reyes witnessed this whole thing and reported it. This is from the Press Enterprise, quote, Ramirez and a friend had left the nightclub near Grand and McFadden Avenues in Santa Ana about 1:30 a.m. on April 16th when the pickup they were riding in was hit from behind by a van at the intersection of Lyon Street and Chestnut Avenue. The occupants of the van and Ramirez, who was driving the pickup, got out and began arguing. The argument quickly became a fistfight. The passenger in the truck got out to help Ramirez, then ran for help. When the man returned with help, Ramirez and the occupants of the van were gone. All they found was a pool of blood on the pavement, a shoe, and a watch.
Amy, was the plan just to beat him up and this got out of control? Or we don't know yet? Or we don't know in general? Okay.
I don't know. I mean, yeah, I'm not sure there's any way to know, but there's some evidence that might help us pick a side.
All right.
When the men in the van detained Ramirez, Esparza said that she was shocked. She and Julianne Rojas went to the bar and sat there for an hour waiting for the men to tell them what to do. But then Van called them to the transmission shop where Esparza admitted that she saw Ramirez bound and hanging from chains from the shop ceiling. He was beaten and bloody.
Whoa.
In her grand jury testimony, Esparza said that Ramirez looked up at her. He said, "I don't know you, little one," she recalled him saying in Spanish. Van asked her if it was him, and she told the grand jury that she could have said yes. Esparza ran downstairs and took refuge in an area of the shop that was used as a bedroom. Diane, Tran, and Rojas were in the room with her. She said she was cowering on the bed, her face buried in her hands, when she heard a male voice outside ask, "Should we kill him?" She said she heard Diane Tran say yes. Quote, "I remember a general yes consensus," she testified. "I didn't hear anybody say no." By the time she emerged, only Cody Tran remained. And he was, quote, spraying something on the walls of the upper loft. Prosecutors say he was spraying chemicals to the blood stains. Van eventually returned and drove Esparza home. As they sat in the car outside her mother's house in the pre-dawn hours of April 16th, 1995, she told the grand jury that she asked Van what had happened to Ramirez, and he said, "We let him go." So this is the part that is at issue. Did Esparza know in advance that the plan all along was to kill Ramirez? Was she in on it? Or if not, then did she know? Or should she have known and reported that the others killed Ramirez?
Right. They also have to show premeditation here, too, which, I mean, it seems like they can show premeditation in terms of abducting him and maybe roughing him up, but they have to show it for the murder as well. So I'm interested to see what plays out in the courtroom.
Well, don't worry, Megan. We're not even halfway done yet, so.
Okay. We'll return after a brief word from our sponsors.
Detective Meza had interviewed Van on June 13th, 1995. When Meza asked how he felt when Esparza told him she'd been raped, Van told the detective, "I was totally devastated. I was really mad." He said he told Esparza that she should report the rape to the police, but she said, "No, that's it. Just leave it like that," Van said. It doesn't sound like Van was pointing the finger at Esparza in any way.
Mm-hmm.
Back in 1995, Meza and his colleagues had visited the body shop where they heard the whole thing had gone down. The white van was still there, and they searched it. They did find a blood drop on the floor in the office of Accurate Transmission, but at the time it could not be definitively linked to Ramirez. Remember, 1995 DNA technology was not what it is today.
Right.
Or even later in 2012. The police went back to Reyes, Ramirez's friend who had been in the truck with him the night of the murder, to show him pictures of Cody Tran, Gianni Van, and the two other friends. Reyes recognized none of them. On March 6, 1996, the police interviewed Van again. He stuck to his story. He said he respected Norma's wishes to forget about the alleged rape incident. He knew nothing about any murder. Here's the exchange. The detective says, "Everything's there. We got the motive. But see, Gianni, I'm right. At this point, at this juncture of the interview, it's coming to a close now. If you don't come out and give me more, Gianni, you're going to go to jail for murder." To which Gianni Van says, "I don't know about anything. I swear to God, I don't know anything about what you were talking about." They then questioned Shannon Grease, who had a history of meth-related arrest. He said he knew nothing about Esparza's rape or Ramirez's murder. On May 30th, 1996, police interviewed Esparza again. She did not tell them anything about the incident in El Cortez, about seeing Ramirez hanging from chains, or anything else that she had told them later on. They did not interview Julie Rojas or Diane Tran, and Diane Tran was the co-owner of the body shop with her husband. They also did not interview Nancy, Esparza's friend. Van was arrested and charged with murder on March 8th, 1996. He and Esparza were married at that time, if you recall. Now, she was in Kenya at the time on a student exchange program. Esparza was interviewed by a new detective upon her return from Kenya, and he had asked her to tell him the story again. And she did not volunteer that her marriage to Van was in name only.
Okay.
So, in other words, Megan, the two did not live together, and they were only in touch sporadically.
Oh, okay.
When detectives and prosecutors realized that Esparza would not testify, that she had confided in the rape to Van, and of course that he had been angry, then they lost their main witness. They didn't really have a case. So the 95-96 case petered out, and the charges against Van were dropped due to the lack of evidence.
Wait, I'm confused. I thought she had to testify. Didn't she enter an agreement?
I'm talking back to 1995,
Right.
1996
Right,
now.
okay. Forget
the
that.
initial.
Scratch that. I got it.
Sorry, I'm going back and forth a little
That's okay.
here. But let's get back to 2012, back to when Esparza testified in the grand jury. And after her testimony, all of the co-conspirators were indicted. Prosecutor Mike Murray told Dateline, quote, "It was clearly a plan. They had identified Gonzalo Ramirez at the club. They followed him from the club. They staged a car accident. They kidnapped him. They'd taken him back to a transmission shop from Santa Ana to Costa Mesa, and they dumped his body in Irvine. That didn't just happen spontaneously. They all pled not guilty." This from the Orange County Register in December of 2012. Gianni Anthony Van, 43, of Costa Mesa, and Diane Tran, 44, of Costa Mesa. They pled not guilty to felony counts of conspiring to commit a crime and murder. If convicted, the two could face a minimum sentence of life in prison without parole. Diane Tran did not want to take her chances at trial. She told police, per Slate, quote, she was ready to talk about Ramirez's murder and confessed that she'd known about the plan to kidnap him days before it happened. She said that Van came to Cody Tran upset about the rape, and the two of them, on their own, decided to beat up Ramirez. That night, she'd gone to the auto shop to see Ramirez out of curiosity and said she thought that Van intended to kill Ramirez at that point. The next day, Cody told her that he, Grease, and Van drove Ramirez down a nearby hill, and Van got out and used the knife to kill him. When the police asked Tran why she hadn't come to them earlier, she said, "I guess it was just my thought. You know what? It's not my problem." Diane ended up pleading guilty in January of 2014 to manslaughter and got a 4-year prison sentence. In the fall of 2013, Esparza, who was now out on $300,000 bail, she was back in California to assist prosecutors in trial prep for the trials of Tran, Van, and Grease. Despite the seriousness of the charges against her, her cooperation, plus the fact that she put her mother's house up to secure the bond, earned her the privilege of going home and coming back as needed. But she was unprepared for the plea deal that she would be offered. It appears that she thought or hoped that the murder charge would be fully dropped. Prosecutors said that she changed some aspects of her story in subsequent interviews with the police and that she needed to have some accountability for her involvement, really the involvement in not being forthcoming with the police.
So she thought she was getting full immunity, and that's not what happened.
Exactly.
Okay.
Orange County Senior Deputy District Attorney Scott Simmons maintained that the understanding was that she would cooperate with prosecutors and plead to a reduced charge of voluntary manslaughter, earning her just a 3-year prison sentence. He says that she was given a date to decide whether she was going to accept this agreement or not. And he said that if she was not going to do this, then bail should be revoked. Simmons added that Esparza should be considered a flight risk because she still had resided in France at the time. In other words, prosecutors told Esparza that it was a guilty plea and 3 years or take her chances in a murder trial. Facing a looming deadline on the plea deal, Esparza held a press conference, which is an unusual step for a criminal defendant. It was here that she denied having any involvement in the slaying of Ramirez. She said that she was being railroaded into pleading guilty. She said that not only was she a victim of rape, but of sexual abuse since she was a child. Per the Orange County Register, quote, Esparza said she was reluctant to report the rape to police because she had been traumatized by sexual abuse as a child. She also didn't report the attack on Ramirez because she feared her co-defendants. Ramirez said, quote, I know that accepting a plea deal would be accepting a lie. The only thing that would prompt me to accept a plea would be so that I don't lose my daughter for the rest of my life. She continued, I want justice for the man who raped me. He did not deserve to die, but I deserve justice as well, not to be punished and wrongly prosecuted. As she spoke, Megan, her 4-year-old daughter stood by her side clutching her dress, and her husband also stood by supporting her. In addition, she had some representatives from End Rape on Campus, which is an organization that works to increase the accountability of institutions of higher education with regard to victims of sexual misconduct.
Right.
Esparza's bail was revoked by Superior Court Judge Gerald G. Johnston at a hearing the next day, wherein she rejected the plea deal. She was cuffed and taken back to jail.
This is surprising to me that she wouldn't have had a deal in place while she was providing this information, agreed to testify. Like, I don't, it's surprising that there wasn't something solid in place, but okay.
Yeah, I'm wondering if she had bad legal advice or no legal advice. Prosecutors insinuated that Esparza was trying to garner sympathy from the public. They stated that as a professor of psychology, she knew how to manipulate her image, complete with a tiny child clinging to her very publicly. The chief of staff for the district attorney's office, Susan Kang Schroeder, told the Pasadena Star News she's a very sophisticated defendant. She has a PhD in psychology, and she knows how to play on people's emotions, including the use of her 4-year-old daughter as a prop at the press conference. This is a woman who is trying to act like the victim in this case when the real victim was brutally murdered and the case went unsolved for 20 years. I know she wants to try this case in the media. We look forward to trying this case in court. In an interview with LA Daily News after the press conference, Esparza said, quote, "I've been victimized a number of times in my life, and now I'm being victimized as a way for a prosecutor to build a career." Now, Esparza received support from many in the international community who felt that she was a victim and not a criminal. She and her husband started a petition via change.org seeking dismissal of the charges. This petition gathered more than 6,000 signatures. Many said that this was a clear case of a victim on trial, but opponents questioned why a grown woman had lied to police, whether by omission or not. Her omission of her role in the events of the night when Ramirez was murdered was not acknowledged by her until someone else reported it, and then she had excuse after excuse as to why it was not her fault. Esparza later told the Slate reporter Emily Bazelon that she was literally unable to tell police the truth in 1995 because she was petrified about what the people who killed Ramirez might do to her. Quote, "These people, I'd learned they were violent, and I just felt that I was under threat, in danger. To have that happen again in such an acute and horrible way after what I'd experienced for all those years at home. I'm really surprised that I didn't fall to pieces and that I was able to continue, but I did."
And now, a brief word from our sponsors.
A preliminary hearing was held on Friday, February 26, 2014, to determine if there was probable cause to believe that she was guilty. The judge ruled that there was, and the case would move ahead to trial. And this would be trial for murder and conspiracy charges.
Wow. Going to be facing serious time.
Yeah, and there was a new star witness, Diane Tran. Remember Diane Tran from earlier?
Yep.
She had an account that could lead to a life sentence for Esparza.
Diane got took a 4-year plea, I remember. Okay, so she's also incentivized to assist.
Yep. I'm not sure what her incentive was, but I agree. There must have definitely been an incentive for her.
Mm-hmm.
So essentially, Megan, there was now new testimony stating that Esparza wasn't forced into anything. She went along with it all. She was even part of planning the retaliation days in advance and knowing that murder was a possibility for the victim. It got worse for Esparza. The Santa Ana Register reported at a July 2014 pretrial hearing, a doctor testified that she was on staff at the Student Center at Pomona College in March 1995 when Esparza told a nurse that she had unprotected sex, not reporting that she was in fact raped. So with this new testimony coming forward, Esparza decided that she better cut her losses. In September of 2014, she reached a deal with prosecutors whereby she was allowed to plead guilty to 1 felony count of voluntary manslaughter. The caveat? She had to testify against the others.
Oh, boy.
This just keeps going back and forth.
Well, this is where these cases become problematic because everyone's incentivized. So, it's hard to discern the real truth.
I agree. Esparza then testified at Van's 2015 trial. She said that Van was angry about her rape and made her identify her rapist. She told the jury that Shannon Grease held a gun to her and made her go upstairs into the auto body to witness the bloodied, battered Ramirez bound in chains. According to the Los Angeles Times, Esparza was the key witness at Van's trial, and as a result of her testimony, he was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life without parole. Now, Van would testify that Cody Tran had carried out the actual murder, and he said he was scared he was next. And then you have Grease. Grease also decided to cut his losses, and he pled guilty to murder in May of 2016 and was sentenced to 25 years to life. Finally, July 16th, 2016, Norma Patricia Esparza was sentenced to 6 years in prison. She was released in June of 2018. That's only 2 years, and she remained on probation for 2 years thereafter. Okay, Megan, so there was a lot here. A lot of, I mentioned co-conspirators in the intro, right? I mean, this whole case rests on people pointing fingers back and forth. The real question here is how much responsibility does Patricia Esparza bear for the death of Gonzalo Ramirez? Does her fear and paralysis, if true, excuse her? Or should she spend years in prison for failing to save the man who raped her? So, some would say Esparza is not blameless, and her own account makes that clear. She did miss repeated chances to go to the police and to tell the truth, and this was especially after she saw Ramirez hanging by chains in the hours before he was killed.
It's awful.
But, of course, you can't help but acknowledge the fact that Ramirez potentially, we'll never know exactly what happened, but evidence suggests that Ramirez did rape Esparza. So some people do look at it saying you're punishing a rape victim, but I see them as kind of two separate issues.
Or one and the same. We say it on our other show that offenders can be, and oftentimes are, both victims and offenders. So I think it's, entirely possible and probable in this case that she's both.
So I think in Esparza's case, the question is, do you believe her account? But it's also which account, because there's a lot of inconsistencies.
Yeah, I don't think we would be able to, I would not feel comfortable being able to determine which account is correct. I do believe she was victimized, though. I certainly believe that. But I do think that she has a level of participation in this crime. And it's really hard to decipher the truth because all of these people pointed fingers at each other and gave different accounts. So how would we ever really know, what's completely true? I'm not sure.
Yep. And this case does highlight the important issue of reporting rape on campus. And we have seen a lot of positive change in this area, more support for students who are sexually assaulted on campuses.
Absolutely.
It is good to see at the end that people were held responsible. Although it was several years later, people were held responsible for Ramirez's brutal murder.
This is a complicated case. There was no clear answer. It seems that perhaps there's some measure of justice served, but it also does. I am glad that on college campuses, things have been substantially improved, I think, in terms of reporting sexual assault. I think that's one, at least positive, that we could note going forward.
I agree. Thank you all so much for listening today, and we hope that you will join us on the next episode of Campus Killings.
Campus Killings is hosted by Dr. Megan Sachs and Dr. Amy Schlossberg, with research and writing by Jessica Betancourt. It's produced by Mike Morford of AbJack Entertainment. Be sure to follow Campus Killings on social media. You can find Campus Killings on Twitter with the handle @CampusKillings, or on Facebook by searching for Campus Killings Podcast. Be sure to tune in every other Saturday for new episodes of Campus Killings.